I'm David Lombardo, and this is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room. After more than 2 decades at the Capitol, representing the city of Binghamton and the surrounding areas, Assemblymember Donna Lupardo isn't running for re-election this fall. And the Southern Tier Democrat, best known these days for her role steering the Assembly Agriculture Committee, joins us in the studio for her exit interview. Thanks for making the time, Assemblymember.
Happy to be here.
So I have parents who are the same age as you and making a similar decision about their careers, but we also see your Albany peer, Tom DiNapoli, pursuing another 4 years as comptroller. Mm-hmm. So what made you want to step away from the Assembly at this time?
Well, assuming your parents are in their early 70s.
They're 72, 1954 babies.
It's a good year. Well, when I turned 70, I started to think about the various chapters I had already had in my life to get to this point. I taught at the university for 10 years until budget cuts from Albany. I lost my position, and I worked in community mental health for another chapter. That was 15 years, and then I got involved in policy and elected office for this 22 years now, and then 2 years on the county legislature. And I thought, how do I want to spend this next chapter? Do I want to continue doing this? Or do I want to perhaps go back to where I started? When I was thinking about retiring, I called the new president of Binghamton University, and I said, thinking about retiring, do you think there might be a spot for me, perhaps teaching or doing something with the administration? And she said, absolutely. Well, we will talk after you get done with what you're doing. So I'm hoping to go back there to work part-time and to have sort of a full circle moment and teach students about some of the things I've learned about navigating policy and being a good steward of whatever career they tend to get into, skill development, that kind of stuff.
Well, with 22 years at the Capitol, that's a class I would sign up for to learn about the insights that you might have to offer.
Well, funny thing, one of the suggestions from poli-sci was that I teach a course on state government, which I politely declined.
Oh, how come?
Well, I don't know if you remember that movie, Dead Poets Society.
Sure.
Where he comes in and basically rips the first chapter out of the poetry book and throws it out the window. I sort of felt I would have that kind of moment where I might find the curriculum a bit stifling.
Great. So you can deviate.
I will. So what I've asked them to consider is that I be a floater, that I can basically teach sections of a variety of different courses. So I'll be available to poli-sci, social work, different classes to talk about state government and whatever might help them. But I think rather than teach a whole course, I'd like to be available to teach in various topics.
Well, what you bring up there about your experiences maybe deviating from a textbook, I think is something I want to explore, which is how has this experience in Albany compared to what maybe you thought you were signing up for when you ran for Assembly in 2004?
I had a pretty good idea what I was signing up for because I had been involved in local politics. And for a short period of time, I worked in one of the Speaker's regional offices. I was teaching part-time, and I had picked up this assignment. I think it might have been Mel Miller had regional offices, and I was on the same floor with Jim Talon.
Okay.
And I got an eyewitness view on how things worked and didn't work. I was also a young environmentalist, and I spent a lot of time in Albany advocating for environmental policies, which is when I got to meet a person who then became my mentor, Maurice Hinchey.
Okay.
And ironically, his daughter is now my counterpart in the state senate. Michelle Hinchey is the senator in charge of head of the Ag Committee, which is kind of an ironic thing that happened there. But yeah, I had a decent idea what I was getting involved with. The biggest struggle for me is that there are so many things that are meshed together. You know, I think Speaker Silver always used to say, nothing's done until it's all done. And I fought against that because I thought, well, couldn't we get one thing done at a time and get stuff done rather than have it all meshed? I thought it was a confusing way of accomplishing things. That's probably the hardest thing I've had to get used to.
What made you want to run in 2004? What was it about the experiences that you had that didn't scare you away from working in this building?
It was an accumulation of my own personal experiences in higher education. When I thought poor decisions were being made about that topic, I went into community mental health, where I got to see another bad set of decisions coming out of Albany regarding mental health insurance and the treatment of the mentally ill. I got to see what happens when environmental issues are ignored, like in Endicott, where we have We had a terrible spill that resulted in vapor intrusion into 400 homes in Endicott. And also, I witnessed a group of elected officials, to be honest, who watched our area lose its manufacturing base and squandered at least a decade waiting for somebody else to come back to save us. Another IBM, if only another, IBM comes to town, or something to replace the shoe manufacturing that went away. And I was one of the folks who said, hey, that Moonstruck movie where Cher says, snap out of it. I was that person to say, we've got to snap out of it. Those businesses were founded on entrepreneurial spirits, people who had a vision, and we have to grow that back. We've got to build that back. And that, combined with all my other issues, propelled me to get over my shyness and reluctance to be out front. I was always the person comfortable behind the scenes, but I got so aggravated, I just bust out in the scene.
So what was that first campaign like, and was that a challenge pivoting to being more out front? I know you'd served on the county legislature, but it's a bigger district. It's probably a race that gets more attention. Being in the assembly, I mean, what was that experience like?
Well, the story got a little more complicated because I did serve on the county legislature. When I ran for re-election, my election ended in the first tie in Broome County history. And George Pataki called a special election in the dead of winter, and I wound up losing it by not very many votes. That's a long story. But the last day of my tenure, the then head of the legislature said to me, we're sorry to see you go. You were really good. You were prepared. You did your homework. You should set your sights higher. And I thought, oh, maybe you shouldn't have mentioned that because I may wind up going after a long-term incumbent. Took me 2 tries, however. I lost the first time I ran. Because of redistricting, I wound up running against 2 incumbents, Jay Dinga and Robert Warner. And so I was at a little bit of a disadvantage because I was against 2 well-known, popular incumbents. So when I got to see the results of that election, I figured I'd have a decent shot running just a clear, straight election against Robert Warner. And I was successful. But it was, I think perhaps the best way to describe it is I was underestimated. And that's always a mistake in elections when people underestimate the opponent. And I knew that.
Was that something you experienced serving in the assembly at all, being underestimated? Because historically, this has been a body run by men, for men, catering to men. And while it's different now, I don't know how different, but was that something you experienced?
That was never my experience.
No? Never got underestimated?
No, I was never my experience because 2 things. One is I was very driven by the cause, the many causes that I was working on. I found good mentors right off the bat: Paul Tonko, Maurice Hinchy, Pete Granis, a lot of very impressive people who were very helpful at the time and gave me good advice. And also I found that women were more valued in the room than people expected. I found that we brought a unique perspective that people valued, believe it or not. And at least that was my experience.
Well, a lot has happened in the agriculture space since you became chair of the committee in 2019, and some of it you've been spearheading, and some of it you've been opposed to, like the bill adopting the overtime threshold. So I'm curious, how have you approached this work, given that there are stakeholders who can be at odds with each other, and you're trying to navigate that, to try to thread that needle, so to speak?
I pretty much approach everything from a core set of values. And I thought that farmers and the agricultural economy deserved an all-hands-on-deck approach, which is why my ranking committee member, Chris Tague, and I got along so well, much to the surprise of a lot of people, because we just found that our love of local foods and our deep respect and concern for farmers outweighed whatever differences we may have had. So it was all about compromise. I took votes that, I might not have taken had I not been the chair of the committee, and that were more grounded in environmental perspectives. However, having been on the farms and experienced challenges these people were facing, like on certain pesticides. They made that case that there are certain tools they need in the toolbox, and that we should leave some of these decisions to the DEC to sort out. So I was persuaded by their experience, but mostly I thought they deserved a level of respect and concern that was a bit lacking at the time.
How do you feel about the agriculture industry as you're stepping away? Do you feel like they're on good footing, or are you concerned about this part of the state's economy moving forward?
I think they're as troubled as the rest of us, probably more so because of the impacts of climate change on their operations, the difficulty with maintaining labor, especially when we have ICE lurking, ready to remove some of their most valuable workers, people who've been there for decades, who do work no one else wants to do. They are struggling with input costs, tariffs. So there's been a lot more on them than in the past. One thing I can say, though, is they feel valued by the state legislature. COVID helped us change the conversation because of the Nourish New York program. And I'm sure you've heard me talk about this in the past, but when we were able to reroute surplus food to save lives, literally, in New York City, members like Catalina Cruz and others made a point of coming on our farm tours to thank those individual farmers. And I think that was critically important. After that, my appeal to my colleagues in the conference about agriculture was a lot easier. They were can-do. What do these folks need? We owe them a lot. And it's noticeable. I'm very proud of that. That relationship building was very heartwarming.
And after a quick break, we'll have more with retiring Assemblymember Donna Lupardo, a Southern Tier Democrat who's opting not to run for re-election this fall. Support for the Capitol Press Room comes from O'Donnell & Associates, a public affairs firm providing strategic guidance to businesses and nonprofits on navigating policy and regulatory issues. More information is available at o'donnellsolutions.com. I'm David Lombardo, and this is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room. For listeners just joining us, we're continuing our conversation with Assemblymember Donna Lupardo, a Democrat who has represented the city of Binghamton and surrounding suburbs for more than 2 decades and has opted not to run for re-election this fall. Well, now Donna Lupardo is synonymous with agriculture, but you've chaired other committees in the Assembly, I think Aging, Children and Families, and when you think about your legacy here outside of agriculture, what do you point to? What do you think you'd like to be remembered by?
Well, before we switch over to agriculture,
Sure.
I just have to say, shout out to the craft beverage industry in New York State, because that's probably one of my proudest accomplishments, is really lifting up all of that and making sure that they had their licenses and barriers were broken down and they could direct consumership, and not to mention the role we played in cannabis legalization. I was always working on the farm side of it, not necessarily the processing and the retail, but helping our farmers get the respect they deserved there. They went through a lot to get to that point, as you well know.
Well, are you concerned about the cannabis farmers, the hemp farmers more specifically, moving forward, especially given whatever is happening at the federal level with regards to the Farm Bill and how they're treating things like CBD moving forward?
I think that things are starting to settle down. It's going to take a long time for us to recuperate from the losses that many of them experienced. And as you know, quite a few went out of business when the retail side was stalled in the opening. But I think they're coming around, and we've got a couple of new young leaders who are stepping up, Zaccaro and Deus, who are going to be pushing bills. We just passed a bill to work on inversion, which is one of the biggest issues they're facing with product coming in from out of state. But back to your original question, I would point to 2 things I feel proud of on children and families. I focused on childcare. Years and years ago, childcare was viewed more as a babysitting type of activity, and my focus was making sure it was viewed as an economic development imperative. And I can point to hearings and other activities which I think helped change the conversation, that we can't have people in the workforce if there isn't available childcare for them.
Sure.
And then when it came to aging, I focused on home care. I've still been focused on nursing homes, but if we can prevent folks from, needing more intensive care by staying in their homes longer, that's a plus. So we drove a lot more resources into keeping people at home through adaptation and services to save money, but it's always been a struggle to keep those going.
Any unfinished business as you think about your time in Albany?
If the session hadn't been overtaken by budget those 2 months, I had intended to focus on a bill I've been frustrated about passing. It's the student journalism bill.
Okay.
Which might be right up your alley.
I'm familiar with it, yes.
And I just always felt that student journalists should be allowed the same type of freedom of the press as journalists like yourself, and without the interference of their school administrators. I also thought that student journalism, when promoted and using the same ethical standards as journalists like yourself, could be a good counterbalance to the type of unfettered news they get online. So I'm very distressed I wasn't able to pass the Student Journalism Act.
And that's a bill that you had for, 5 or 6 years now?
Oh, more than that. Yeah, a long time. A long time. I originally had it with Senator O'Mara.
Well, what does that say to you about the flow of legislation through the Assembly, more specifically, and the legislature more broadly? I mean, do we have a working system? Should it be easier for rank-and-file members to get bills to the floor? You're starting to make a face.
You're going down a slippery, slidey slope with that. Yeah, of course, there's always conversation about how much the staff gets in the middle of what we're doing. We do appreciate our counsel and the advice they give. We do sometimes wish we could, blow through some of the objections and get a more fair hearing on some things. But to be honest, on the journalism bill, that bill has been blocked by big associations, from the Superintendent's Association, the school boards. It wasn't somebody nervous about going there. It was genuinely opposed. I had just gotten NYSED, the teachers union, to stay neutral on it. That was my big accomplishment at the early part of the year, and I was going to try to monopolize on that. But it's all right. We'll continue making noise about it.
Well, you served in the Assembly during 5 different governors, I believe. Was that something that demonstrably impacted your experience? Imagine having a Republican governor changes what you can get through, but maybe did the Democrats provide a very different personalities or perspective that trickled down to how you did your work?
That's a whole nother interview, to be honest with you. When Governor Pataki was there, my Senate majority partner was Tom Livis. We got a lot done.
I bet.
During that stretch, I have to tell you. And when he was in the majority, we were, he was a senior member, and we got a lot of investments brought into the community. There's just personalities. Senator, of course, you well know some of the travails we went through with Governor Cuomo. Very intense fellow, and got a lot done. He helped me on a number of fronts get some bills over the finish line. One interesting story about Governor Patterson. I don't know if you recall, it was one of the latest state budgets in history, went to August 3rd. And
that's the 2010 one, I think?
Yes, 2010. And I was part of a group of legislators who stormed the offices and refused to leave. We had a sit-in protest in his office. He took it in stride, and I think it helped us move things along. It was kind of a last-minute effort, last-ditch effort. My 1960s mentality came in. Let's go downstairs and not leave until we get to talk to him about what the problem is. You haven't heard that story?
No. How did it go?
It was really funny because after I just blurted that out, Jack McEnany, who was a member at the time and a historian, was sitting next to me, and he says, "I know exactly how we can do it." I hope you don't mind me telling this story, Jack. And I said, "We're going down, taking over the office." And about 25 of us went down, and Jack approached the officer out front of the governor's office and said, "I have a group of legislators here who I'd like to show some paintings to in the back, in the red room, I think it is." Yeah, go right ahead, Jack. And once we went in, we just sat down and said, we're not leaving until we talk to the governor. It was pretty funny. We'd never be able to get away with that now, but...
Well, it does make me think of the changing of the guard, so to speak, in the makeup of the assembly. And there's going to be a lot of turnover from 2026 to 2027, in part because of retirements, but also because some incumbents lost their seats. And we're seeing these new members who come from sort of this activism class. And I guess whether it's their ideology or where their backgrounds are, whether you think this is going to be a demonstrably different experience for the assembly in 2027 than it has been for your 22 years.
It's hard to say. You know, the institution is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
The governor releases her budget, or his budget, and we go through all of the processes that are involved with that in the budget hearings. And by the time all the mechanics take place and you do eventually get a budget, then it's all a question of, are you mentored well enough to get your legislation through? And do you have the temerity to stick with it when it's something difficult? I'm not really concerned about this new group of people who are coming in. My experience is that we're all on the same page. I mean, we all want universal child care and access to health care and good schools. And to me, it's always been a question of speed. Even with my Republican colleagues, we're all on the same page. It's a question of how fast we get there. Our Republican colleagues want us to go slower. A lot of folks want us to go a lot faster. And then there's this moderate group of us in the middle saying, let's just get stuff done. If we have to slow down, so long as we get things done. And I think that's been the tension, is the speed with which we get to the things we're trying to do and how we pay for it. Once people understand that we all want the same stuff, there's a certain comfort level. And then we just argue about how it's going to get paid for and how quickly it gets accomplished. Does that make sense?
It does. Well, we've been speaking with Assembly Agriculture Committee Chair Donna Lupardo. She is a Southern Tier Democrat who's retiring from the chamber after more than 2 decades here at the Capitol. Assemblymember, thanks for sitting down with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Support for the Capitol Press Room is provided by New York State United Teachers, a statewide union of nearly 700,000 professionals in education and healthcare.